For us to be here. I'm Barbara Landau, as President Daniels said, and I want to welcome everybody who's in this room. I understand there's something like 200 people, as well as the more than 200 people who we have watching us on live streaming video. We really invite you into this evening as a conversational partner. We don't want to tell you what we're doing. We want to talk with you about what we're doing and hear your thoughts and questions. So we really invite you to interrupt, raise your hand, send a question. There are going to be people who are watching online who may be submitting questions, and we'll try our best to answer them. Most likely we won't be able to answer them, but they'll be interesting questions and generate great discussions. I'd like to start by introducing the panel.
My name is Rick Huebner. I'm the director of the Solomon H. Snyder Department of Neuroscience, and I'm also the co-director of the Medical School Brain Science Institute.
I'm Lisa Feigenson, Associate Professor of Psychological and Brain Science and co-director of the Laboratory for Child Development at Johns Hopkins.
And I'm David Andrews, Dean of the School of Education at Johns Hopkins, a professor in education and in the Bloomberg School of Public Health.
So in this conversation, I guess the best thing to do would be just to start it off by giving you a very, very brief overview of what we envision for the science of learning. And then, before we turn it over to the panelists to talk a little bit about what their research and interests are, I'll want to do two things. One is to toss out some questions to you to get you thinking about the kinds of things that keep us up at night. And the second is to just give a little bit of history and to tell you about where we are with the Science of Learning Institute now and where we hope to go in the future. As President Daniels expressed, the Science of Learning endeavor has a goal of understanding learning at all levels of analysis, from the level of cells, how do the cells talk to each other in the brain, up through the cognitive level, where we want to understand how children and even adults learn to read. How do they come to represent the symbols that are the letters and then combine them, reading print off of the page, up to the level of schools, where we have to ask the question, how do we arrange schools? How do we arrange learning experience such that we get optimized learning? And in all of this, we want to ask these questions about learning across many different populations. So we want to understand not only how does the typically developing individual child learn, but also what happens when there is a genetic disorder, when the learner is slow in some way, has struggles to learn certain things, or even when they're very, very gifted and talented, as in many of our students from the Center for Talented Youth. So we want to know about levels of analysis in learning, and we want to understand how different kinds of learners learn, what challenges they have, and what successes they can be helped with. The end game for all of this, I'm sure, understand, is that the goal is to optimize learning for all. So everything that we can learn from a scientific basis in terms of how learning occurs is going to allow us to think about how we can change things, how we can make things better. Having said that, I'm now going to duck into my 2 points that I'm going to make before we move to the panel. The first point is really throwing out the questions to you. So I've just listed 6 questions that I think keep all of us up at night. This is what we do. This is what we're passionate about. We hope to engage all of you. So here I go. Question number 1. What happens in our brains when we learn something? When we remember something that we learned yesterday or even 10 years ago? What happens when we fail to remember? Second question. Why is it so easy for a 2-year-old to learn his or her native language, or even 2 or 3 native languages at the same time, and yet it's so difficult for us as adults to learn even 1 new language? Third question, why are there such big apparent individual differences in success at learning math? Is it caused by basic innate talents or lack of talent, or is it differences in experience, or maybe a combination of both? Fourth question, what are the biological roots of memory? How does this change over the lifespan? How does it change when an individual has sustained brain damage? How does it change under disease, such as Alzheimer's? Fifth question, why are our schools less effective than they should be, and how can we fix them? What about personalized learning? Is that a reality? And sixth question, what is the role of machines in understanding and improving human learning? How can we become more effective partners with machines in terms of human learning? Those are the kinds of things that we think about. You'll hear more from my colleagues on the panel in terms of specifics. I now want to duck back into talking a little bit about where the Institute is. President Daniels mentioned that we were extremely fortunate to receive a gift from an anonymous donor, which allowed us to launch the Institute. We did this last January. And since January, we've actually made what we think is very good progress, exciting progress in building the Institute and in building real excitement around the university in this endeavor. The three things that I can point to that we've done are, number one, we were able to make a first round of funding for faculty groups who applied to the Science of Learning Institute to fund innovative research that would not otherwise get funded. And the reason for it not getting funded is not because it wasn't good. It was rather because the kinds of research that they were proposing were really quite cutting edge. There wasn't a lot of pilot data necessarily in advance of the proposals, but they were really ideas that really needed to be tested. And we were able to fund 7 grants as of last July. The second thing we've been able to do is to begin to really build the community. We already had in place at Hopkins a very, very vibrant community of brain and cognitive scientists and educators and people who think about development. But what we've been able to do is actually build on that initial base. And we've actually been having a number of community building events. They're actually Belgian beer festivals. If you think Belgian beer is good, you're right. If you think that it helps build community, you're really right. And what these Belgian beer community events have done is brought people from across the university who are involved or interested in science of learning to hear each other in very brief presentations where we then all get to schmooze with each other and talk about new problems. From the first 2 events, I personally know of 3 new collaborations across the university between scientists who really didn't know what the other had done, but saw a connection. So the community building events are working well. Finally, the third thing that I think we can point to as an initial success is the planning for a really fantastic symposium on the science of learning that's to be held in January 13th and 14th, if you'd like to put it into your Blackberries right now. We really extend the invitation to everyone and hope that as many people can come as possible. We'll also be live streaming much of it. That symposium is going to host many different keynote speakers, both from outside of the university and inside of the university. And of key importance, we're actually partnering with the Gateway Sciences Initiative that President Daniels mentioned. The Gateway Sciences Initiative is designed to change the way undergraduate science is taught, and they have had several symposia for the past 2 years, annual symposia. This year we're partnering with them to start at the level of cells and go all the way up through schools, including talking about innovative ways of teaching the gateway sciences. So those are some of the things that we've been able to do. There's no question that we could not have done it without the initial gift, and we're very grateful. I now want to turn it over to our panelists and talk about the future. And so I'm going to ask each of them to talk for maybe 3 or 4 minutes about what they do. I have to tell you that asking faculty to talk for just 3 or 4 minutes is really hard. So I may be the timekeeper, but I think they'll all be very much on time. I'll turn it over to Rick first.
So my interest in learning and memory actually started in elementary school. I studied the color preference of mealworms and in 4th grade. And then in high school, I studied goldfish learning. So I've been at this a long time. And but in the last 2.5 decades at Hopkins, I've really been trying to understand what happens in your brain when you learn something. How are memories encoded? And I'm a molecular biologist, a biochemist, so what I want to understand is what physically is changing in your brain when you learn something and you encode it. So just for example, a recent study, we've been studying a gene called KIBRA, and KIBRA, through psychological studies and genetic studies, has been associated with memory performance in humans. And so there are two variants in the KIBRA gene, and one they're very common. So 70% of you in the audience have one, what we might call the smarter variant, and the other 30% of you have what we might call the less smart variant. And this, we know what the changes are in the DNA and the structure of these genes, and it's really pretty subtle. It's people with the smart variant can remember maybe 7 to 10 words in a word recall, a working memory test, where the less smart variants remember 5 to 7 or so words in a row. But this gave us a clue that this gene was really important for memory. So we've been studying this gene, and what we found is that this gene modifies synapses in your brain and modifies the communication between neurons in the brain. And so we're continuing the study to try to understand these pathways in detail. Now, this gene also protects against late onset Alzheimer's disease, so it's actually very clinically relevant. And many of these genes that we've studied, understanding this really reveals the mysteries of sort of learning and memory, but they are also now being discovered to be mutated in a variety of cognitive disorders such as autism, schizophrenia, intellectual disability, and Alzheimer's disease. So our studies are extending into this more clinical realm, trying to understand what goes wrong with these genes in those diseases.
Great. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. So alongside my colleagues like Rick, who are taking on the challenge of understanding learning from a cellular and a molecular level, many of us at Hopkins want to understand learning at the level of the individual learner. And in my own work, we're studying a population of learners who arguably have the most to learn about the world, and that's babies and little kids. So when you study babies and little kids, there's really two kind of goals. On the one hand, you want to understand the starting state. What knowledge about the world, what expectations do babies have already from birth in the absence of experience? So that's the kind of knowledge that isn't going to depend on what culture you grew up in, what particular schooling opportunities you have. It's the kind of knowledge that might be shared with very distant non-human species. And on the other hand, you want to understand what are the kinds of knowledge that are unique to us humans and that are very experience dependent, and that may be dependent on formal education, okay? So let me give you an example from our own work. Lately in my lab, we've been interested in the cognitive foundations of mathematics, how what lets us do math. And I think math is a really interesting area of study for a couple of reasons. One is that none of this fabulous science that you'll be hearing about tonight could happen without it. Another is that as a society, we all consider it to be an absolutely integral part of every child's education. And third is that, as you well know, there's radical differences in people's mathematical abilities, right? So some children just acquire math concepts effortlessly, easily, and other people, even adults, struggle to balance checkbooks. So why is this? How can we understand these kinds of discrepancies? So what has our work shown about math and numerical knowledge? Well, one surprising thing is that some aspects of math and number don't require experience. They're there in tiny, tiny infants. They're there in newborn infants. So a newborn infant, years before sitting in a classroom, learning number words, looks out at the world and sees things in terms of number, okay? It's a rough sense of number. It's approximate. A newborn baby can match 16 sounds to 16 dots, okay? Or that tell that 16 is different from 50. This is an approximate sense of number. It's very different from the kind of precise, exact sense of number that you need to solve differential equations or do long division. So we have to also answer where that uniquely human kind of math knowledge comes from. That is very dependent on experience, dependent on how much parents and teachers talk to you about number and so on. But one really interesting revelation has been that these two things, these two kinds of knowledge about number and math are intimately connected. So for example, right, all of us have this ability since we were tiny infants to approximate number. Turns out that some people are just much better at it than others. So some people look out at this room and say, like, there's 210 people here, about 210 people. Other people don't have that precise a sense. They'll say, I don't know, something between 100 and 500. Well, we found that how precise your gut sense of number, without counting, without number words, just your gut sense of number that you get looking out at the world, that predicts how well you're going to do at mathematics all throughout your lifespan. How well you're going to do on the SAT, a whole bunch of different things. And we can trace those individual differences back to when you were a tiny, tiny kid. So that's interesting, but it creates for us some opportunities, some questions. So one is, can we get in there and intervene on this basic cognitive gut sense of number and make it better? Can we sharpen it? And if we can sharpen it, does it then make you better at math? And a sort of preview is that we found that it can in 5-year-old kids. But to really understand the nature of this mechanism, how these things affect each other and how we can harness it to help kids be better learners and better at mathematics, that requires real conversation between people doing the basic science and people on the education side, teachers and developers of curricula. And I think it's that makes this kind of conversation that we're having here tonight so exciting.
Well, I'm really excited to be here for a number of reasons. I've been doing this a long time as well. I don't think I started with goldfish in the 4th grade. I was probably trying to figure out how to keep my goldfish alive in the 4th grade and develop a sense of responsibility around feeding the goldfish. But while Rick was studying that, I was thinking about educational settings and environments. And the other reason I'm excited here is it's one of the things that this initiative has done is allowed us to not only talk across our respective areas, but to get excited and motivated by the work that's being done. And you can see this sequence emerging. You can see the basic mechanisms of learning, and then a bit of a more applied approach with looking at individual differences and how do we understand, as well as be able to diagnose these individual differences. And then I get the joy and the excitement of trying to figure out the so what. What do we do about it? How do we change learning environments, not just schools, but all learning environments to create maximum learning and to facilitate this kind of love of learning that we've all been able to establish over the years. So for me, it's good to be at the tail end of this exercise, and it's exciting. I get exciting every time I hear these guys talk about their work, because it forces us to think about how do we start doing things differently than we've done them in the past, especially in creating learning environments. And in case you haven't noticed, we've been doing things pretty much the same way for the last couple hundred years. I refer to it as feeding the chickens. Now, most of you probably never fed any chickens, but if you have fed chickens, you basically walk out with a bucket of food. You reach into that bucket and you throw the food on the ground, and a bunch of chickens are there, and the chickens either eat the food or they don't. And some eat the food quicker than others, and they take more than their share. Others can't find the food. They're wandering around still, looking through the fence, trying to find a piece of grass. But there's variability in the consumption of that. And those who are feeding the food don't pay any attention to that until it comes time to harvest those chickens, and then we put them on a scale and see what they weigh, and we're happy with some, we're not happy with others. It's essentially the way we've approached learning for the last couple of hundred centuries, unfortunately. We have gone to school, and one to many, we have thrown out information. And we've thrown out this information, and the purpose of many schools has been to sort through and weigh the chickens at the end of the day and see who consumed the most information and took advantage of the opportunity that we put before them by throwing out that information on the ground. Well, we have an opportunity now to do something very, very different, and it's a combination of things that's making this happen. It's what we know about basic learning mechanisms, it's what we know about individual differences, and then not represented here on the panel is what we know about machines and the ability of machines and data to help us personalize the experience for the learner. We now have, I think for the first time, a window of opportunity to create personalized systems of education that we've never seen before. The ability to really provide an experience for each learner that's matched to their individual differences and that continues to respond to data that's being collected that helps us understand how to maximize that learning. And it's not just on the cognitive side, it's on the social emotional side, it's on physical learning, it's on every aspect of learning, that we now have the capacity and then have the machines that are available to help us deliver that content in ways that allow humans to be more efficient in their interactions with one another. So we've seen an explosion of work in the online world. You've heard about blended classrooms, and you've heard about flipped classrooms and hybrid. There's a wealth of things that are changing in the educational landscape. But what we need to do is make sure that as we look at those things, we're not just throwing darts at particular interventions, that we're using the same rigor of science that's gotten us to an understanding of the basic mechanisms and individual differences and the science that we use in creating machine learning. We use that same science to figure out what's working in our educational system. So the parallel that we've been talking about are the parallels not with medicine but with public health. So at the end of the day, we'll know that this initiative is successful when we've changed the way that learners are experiencing a learning environment in the United States or around the world, and we've improved in learning environments to the extent that we can, in public health, they're talking about wiping out diseases, and malaria is one. When we can wipe out ignorance because of our understanding. Now, granted, that will take a while because we have our federal politicians to deal with, but at some point we will be able to move forward in personalizing experience so that we can at least close the achievement gap. And the achievement gap that we're all worried about between our socioeconomically disadvantaged students and those who are more economically advantaged is a major challenge for us across the United States and I would say across the world. So we have great hope for the ability to take all of this information and create very personalized environments driven by data, dependent upon machines in some cases not, but really attending to the individual learner so that when we are looking back on our educational experience, it's not just those who were motivated enough to find the grain that we're going to declare a success. We're going to go back and make sure that as we feed our students with the knowledge they need to be successful, that they're getting what they need and they're measuring that at a much more granular level than we've ever seen before.
So, what questions can we answer from the audience? Yes?
So I have a question. In terms of personalized education, I feel like that would add a lot of inefficiencies somewhat to the classroom, because then rather than throwing everything out there and seeing who can get it, which is efficient for the teacher, how would you then get over the inefficiencies in personalized learning?
So we're seeing technology allow us to do this and a much more better understanding of student profiles by the accumulation of data. So for example, a third grader has had probably 24 adults or more who have had a meaningful role in their life acquiring information up until the time they're in the third grade. Almost none of that is accumulated in any particular way to help a teacher look at a dashboard and say, what does this particular third grader need that other third graders don't need? How are we implementing diagnostics at an individual level that help us make those decisions and help teachers make those decisions much more efficiently than they have in the past? So we're seeing this explosion of understanding and analytics around the data profiles of students. By the way, we're also seeing this evolution in personalized learning is directly paralleling what we're seeing in personalized and individualized health. Same kind of information that's necessary in order to create the more precise diagnostics that allow teachers to deliver a more personalized environment.
Can I build on something,
Sure.
David, for just a minute? So one thing that I did want to say is that a lot of the science that we do is solving, of course, very, very hard problems, but it requires solving the problem of how an individual can learn best is a hard problem that requires both analysis of the problem of that individual as well as figuring out an innovation that would change things. And I just want to quickly tell you a story about one such enterprise that we actually funded in the round of funding. And that's the work of our colleague Mike McCloskey, who is by training a cognitive neuropsychologist. He was, it came to his attention that there was a 12-year-old girl in upstate New York who had a brain malformation, and all of a sudden she couldn't read. She could not perceive letters. And he's very interested in perception and cognition. He went up there to try to understand why she couldn't read and did a variety of different basic experimental tests, probes of her deficit to discover, first of all, to show that she in fact couldn't perceive the letters. She could perceive everything else just fine. But when she saw letters, she would say it was just a blur. And so having established that she actually had a deficit that was highly specific, and having confirmed that through very extensive psychological testing, experimental testing, he then started to probe how could you fix it? And this is highly individualized, this is highly personalized. And what they discovered was that when they made the letters not be letters to her brain, she could read, and they did it as follows. It was from a variety of different people who were giving input, so the therapists from school and the teachers and the people, her parents and so forth. They came upon a solution where basically they tried different fonts, the different fonts didn't work. They ended up doing a double strike through each letter, okay? When the text had a double strike through the word, all of a sudden she could read the words. And you see videos of her prior to this intervention and immediately after the intervention, and all of a sudden she could not read, and then she could read. What they did afterwards was to develop an app for her iPad. They got her an iPad, they developed an app so that any text that she received could be scanned in, and then the app would convert it to double strike through the words. So she now can read in school and do all of her schoolwork. The point that I wanted to make is the kinds of personalized interventions that I think we all have in mind are not only the ones that sort of apply at the level of the classroom, but also apply at the level of the individual where something seriously goes wrong. And we have to go in and do the basic science in order to understand what has gone wrong and then get really creative about doing innovations. Yeah.
Are you guys doing any research about MinecraftEDU? And the reason why I'm asking is because it's such a creative environment, and I've been hearing about how they're able to create custom classes with MinecraftEDU. Have you guys done any research with that?
I haven't.
So the only Minecraft that I know is the program where you do buildings. Is it the same company?
No, actually, a fellow developed, I just heard about it in my co-working space in Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
Maker's Factory at the Cruzeo building, they're pushing forward with this. They were originally a 3D printing company, and now they're all about teaching kids using MinecraftEDU. And what it is I mean, I don't play Minecraft, so I don't know everything about it, but it's a highly creative space.
Right.
And children thrive
They
in
love it.
They
Yeah.
love it.
Mm-hmm.
And a fellow, and I don't know his name, created an educational space on top of Minecraft, and now they're exploring what's possible with teaching through that.
So this kind of partnership between the teachers and the engineers is just absolutely crucial, and I think that's one of our real strengths at Hopkins, that we have the School of Engineering and quite a number of engineers who are deeply involved in the science of learning and are coming to our Belgian beer fests and other events, and talking with cognitive scientists, neuroscientists, and so forth to develop new ways of creating personalized learning.
And there is a strong emerging set of research studies on creativity and the role of creativity and the advancement of knowledge. So I think any mechanism where we're encouraging creativity and manipulative types of experiences, whether it's in real world or virtual world kind of experiences, are going to be more and more important.
Yes.
I think everyone can hear me without a mic. Okay.
I think it's hard for the people who are online, though.
Hello.
So thank you.
I'm very interested in what your take is on what seems to be an all-prevailing lack of good nutrition
Now in the United States, it's hitting all socioeconomic levels, right? Because people are not eating whole foods, the GMO products that many people are consuming, and the fact that a lot of people have very low vitamin D levels, magnesium levels, and you know, this is obviously affecting cognitive function for everyone. So are you doing any research on nutrition?
So the people who are doing research on nutrition and cognition are actually in the Bloomberg School of Public Health. And one of the great things, President Daniels mentioned that we have this magnificent gift from Michael Bloomberg to fund a whole set of new faculty positions. And one of the proposals is to hire a person that exactly works in the area of environmental deprivation, which nutrition is part of. And so we know that there is a whole host of factors that will affect brain development, that will affect your ability to function in school, your ability to learn, and so forth. And so I think that's a very, very important area. We don't have a representative here, but it is in the university for sure. Yeah.
We're searching for that person right now.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add, I think that's a great point. That requires understanding both how nutritional and physical environment affect learning, but also another piece of that is how children themselves think about nutrition and make those kinds of decisions, right? Because parents and teachers can control to some extent what children ingest, but really you want a change in the way that children think about their bodies and their minds. And actually teaching children about those things turns out to be a really interesting challenge in overturning some of their initial beliefs about the way the body works.
So can we take a question back here? And then up front?
I'm curious about your take on something called MOOCs, massive open online courses, which are very popular here in Silicon Valley, becoming more and more popular. How do you think these MOOCs will impact the world, and how do you think they can be improved to do a better job?
Well, I can start with that. You know, all of the MOOCs are massive open online courses, are first generation. The quality will continue to improve. I think the fundamental difference between, or the fundamental impact that MOOCs have had, along with Khan Academy in the K-12 space, is the pushing the consumer to the notion that content should be free. All of the fact that these are all free, these are all free content resources, have really started to change consumers' understanding of kind of where they need to go for the right types of information. And the fact that the most highly ranked universities release MOOCs first, have gotten a lot of attention. I think we still have a lot to learn about what the role of online learning in general is going to play relative to face-to-face in higher education, but certainly the explosion of interest across the world in consuming content from the very best professors around the world and doing that for free has become a phenomena that we need to better understand. And we better understand it quickly because of the implications for the price point of higher education.
So I think there was another question up front.
I suspect you might be aware that there's a lot of this kind of innovation going on nearby here.
Absolutely.
I was just wondering if any of you would like to share any stories or ideas about what you might be out here to see, other than us. or do you even have time to think about that?
So I actually, there's quite a bit of innovation that's, besides this other school that's up right close by, there's a lot of innovation in the K-12 space going on in this community, in the charter schools, in the rocket ship schools, Summit Academy that's here, really some interesting things going on in how you use technology within schools to facilitate learning, and not just uniformly for all students. It's not like we're replacing teachers with computer-assisted instruction. It really is this notion of, can we do some things better with machine-enhanced learning, whether it's computer-assisted or synchronous online tutoring, where the tutor's in a different place somewhere in the country. But there are a number of things going on out here that are quite innovative, and some of it is the presence of technology entrepreneurs in this area. But to be honest, some of it is out of desperation, trying to be able to deal with the financial cuts for the public school system. Some of the high schools are looking at student-to-teacher ratios of 80-1. And in those settings, how do you use different models? And it's a perfect example of how kind of necessity creates some very interesting outcomes where computers and online resources are being used more innovatively than they are in other parts of the country to help solve a financial problem. So I'm out here sometimes to see those kind of things.
You know, personally, I'm flying back tomorrow, but but I think what another way you're asking your question is what's different about Hopkins, or what what's unique about Hopkins, and I've been around a lot, and and Ron inferred this earlier, that really what's different about us is that we all talk to each other. So we have not only School of Education, Engineering, Medical School, School of Public Health, but we are very, very collaborative, even before the Science of Learning initiative or institute. And so that's what makes us different than, I would say, most of our peer institutions, that we really collaborate, talk with each other, and that's going to make a difference.
So there was one question back here that from before, and then, there are a lot of hands now. We're just getting warmed up. So why don't we do 1, and then 2, 3, and 4, and then we probably have to close it because of the time. I'm mindful of time. So, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here and for all the work you do. When my niece was a teenager, she was taken to a museum and she looked very bored, and she was asked, don't you find it interesting? She says, I don't like interesting things. And so I wonder whether any of the work you do addresses that kind of inertia that you may find in students about learning.
I think that just thinking about the students at Hopkins are generally quite well motivated, but there are always quite a bit of individual differences in how engaged they might be in the classroom. So I think that actually one of the points of the Gateway Sciences Initiative, for example, is to rethink how we teach the basic sciences. So I know, a similar story. My children are not scientists. My 2 sons are not scientists, and in fact, they have told me that they found science really boring. I contend it was because they were taught wrong. So I think that the initiative of trying to figure out how can we be much more engaging in our teaching is a very, very important one, and that is something that we're paying a lot of attention to. Yes. So there were I can't see that well because of the lights, but there were 3 further questions. Okay. Yeah.
This is for Dr. Hugenotmir.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, do you do any collaboration with regeneration? People are doing regenerative work, or with undifferentiated material?
Yeah, so one thing about learning is that it impacts many, many things, from learning languages, learning our normal learning. But one key thing is that recovery from stroke and from nerve damage and things like that is a rewiring of the brain or the spinal cord or whatever it is. So the same sort of mechanisms that are going on while you're learning a new memory or a new task is actually those same types of things are occurring in recovery from stroke. So we have a series of scientists who are very interested in regeneration and repair, and are studying the basic mechanisms of that, and actually using iPads and computer games and to actually, for therapy, to develop games that improve recovery from stroke. Is that what you were talking about, is sort of regeneration in that sense, or?
Molecular level. Okay.
So, what's the question?
On the molecular level, regeneration on the molecular level.
So.
Or undifferentiated.
So of course, there's a huge movement at Hopkins looking at stem cells and looking at development of stem cells for therapy and the molecular development of those cells. So we have 2 stem cell cores where We take cells, fibroblasts, skin cells from patients who have specific diseases, and we can grow them and actually turn them into neurons, and then understand what's happening, what's wrong with those neurons, for example, an ALS patient or a patient with Parkinson's or with Alzheimer's disease, and try to understand what at the molecular level is wrong and study that in detail. So.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. Yes?
So as someone who comes from the biotechnology industry, specifically talking about the gene you mentioned earlier, I'm clearly not one of the smart people because I can't remember what it's called. But I'm just curious what kind of partnerships you're forming with industry because of all the current ongoing clinical trials that are targeting specifically Alzheimer's, and if you can try and get some data from those trials with respect to biomarkers for people who are carriers of that gene or mutations of that gene, and what kind of data you can get from that.
Sure. So we have lots of partnerships with pharma, pharmaceutical and biotech. So they actually come in and they fund various research in different laboratories and try to, again, support the basic research, understanding how these genes work and the therapeutics. So, for example, this set of genes are involved in Alzheimer's disease, and we're targeting, working with Biogen, which is in Boston, a company to develop drugs to interfere with this defective form of this gene. So we're working with them as well. A couple years ago, we had a paper looking at fear erasure, on erasing fearful memories, traumatic memories. And we figured out a pathway how you can erase the fear associated with certain memories. And so we're developing in-house with a bunch of chemists drugs that could actually engage that signaling pathway to actually treat PTSD and other traumatic mechanisms. So there's a lot of interaction between what we're doing at the basic level with both pharma and biotech and for clinical therapies.
Okay. Last question for this room.
Yeah, so the intro video mentioned Facebook and Twitter, and I was wondering if any of you have done any research or are familiar with any research about how constant exposure to social media impacts a student's ability to learn.
It doesn't have any effect at all. I think the one thing that's, that we can say that's highly relevant is we do have a colleague who works a lot on attention and asking whether or not one can multitask. This is Steve Yantis's work in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences, and his contention is really that there's always a cost. And so you can imagine from that leads to, of course, the first step of saying you can't be holding your cell phone and talking while you're driving. You certainly can't be texting while you're driving. But attention is deployed whether you have your 2 eyes in a location or not. You can be attending to other things. And again, the research seems to indicate that there really isn't anything such as multitasking where there's no penalty. And so that would then lead to the conclusion that we have to be very, very careful about making sure that our students are not trying to do their calculus exercises at the same time as they're texting to whoever.
I would just extend that and say that we know that social networking in general as a communication form and a way to connect is actually very advantageous to us in setting up learning communities. So we now have the capacity to bring students together from across campus and from across the world in ways that we never could before. So, one of the side effects of MOOCs are people finding each other who have an intense interest in a particular course. And, there may be 100,000 that sign up for the course, 7,000 that finish the course, but 100 of those stay together in these learning communities that are facilitated by some form of social networking and communication that we didn't have 2 decades ago. So we're seeing these learning communities form, engage, and stay together for longer periods of time. We have to figure out a way how to work that into our basic package in delivering education so that we're not fighting against the prevalence of social networking, but that we're using that to our advantage.
Good. So I hate to say this, but we do need to close questions here in this room, but hopefully we'll be able to continue it. in the next room.
Thank you, Dr. Landau, Dean Andrews, and Drs. Feigenson and Huganier. I think I can speak for everyone here when I say, wow, that was extraordinary. And to think of what all of you together with your colleagues might be able to accomplish and change over the course of the next decade is pretty extraordinary to think about. So thank you for that. From our beginning more than 135 years ago, Johns Hopkins has been able to make a difference in this world because of the generous support of many individuals. Whether they are our alumni or friends, former patients, foundations, corporations, our supporters are with us when every mind is brightened, every discovery is made, and every life is advanced. And tonight, I am pleased to announce that since January of 2010, we have raised $2.21 billion towards our goal, which is 49% of the total. And I think that we can pause here for some applause because that's an extraordinary accomplishment. More than 160,000 people have contributed so far, which is truly an incredible number. In a campaign called Rising to the Challenge, we would characterize these people as our early risers. Johns Hopkins could not begin to tackle the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead without the advocacy and generosity of all of you. People like you, too, who give in so many ways and on so many levels. By giving of your time, your talent, and your treasure, you not only help drive the important work that is now underway across Hopkins, you give us the confidence to carry forward with this new and ambitious campaign. I'd ask you to please join me in sharing our rising story with your fellow friends, alumni, and networks. Together with your support, we will rise to the challenge of our time. Our Rising Roadshow continues next month in Boston, with additional conversations planned for San Diego, Philadelphia, New York, and Hong Kong. And I hope tonight's discussion has whetted your appetite for more, and that you'll keep the dialogue going. I know that you realize by now that the people of Johns Hopkins never retreat from a challenge. This is who we are. This is the legacy that we inherit, and we must carry it forward. It is time, and we are ready to rise to the challenges before us.
Our ideas, our energies, our passion and optimism can contribute so much to the community of which we are part. How we galvanize our intellectual and moral strengths for the betterment of our community and for the betterment of ourselves stands as yet another compelling challenge that we must address. And in rising to this challenge, let us not forget that we are not only of one community, but of many.
We have a wonderful reception awaiting us just outside this room. As you continue the conversation, please enjoy the virtuoso guitar playing of Tom Warren, who is a 1982 graduate of the Peabody Conservatory. So thanks to you all, and good night.